Today we're talking about Zed and his current balance. I predicted a while ago that he was probably going to be an awkward release, and I think that holds pretty true overall. I want to talk a little bit about how he's performing right now, what we can see in many games, and then I want to make some propositions what could be adjusted about him. In that, I'm primarily going to focus on minor tweaks instead of major overhauls to the character, because those are much easier to implement. So if you look at these games here, I think they kind of reflect most people's Zed experience. You can either have a really good game with him and really stomp, or a really bad game and feel like you're barely doing anything at all really. Now depending on how good you are, the exact outcome for you here can change, but from what I've generally seen from most players, they are not doing too well with Zed. I already talked about this in my Zed guide. A lot of players have a lot of issues with him for different reasons. And I think a core reason for all of this is his current design. And this design is that he is incredibly snowbally. Now there are snowbally characters in Smite, that's nothing new, but I think Zed kind of takes it to the next level. He does not have CC immunity in his kit, like full on hard CC immunity, and he does not have hard CC in his kit either, meaning he very much relies on doing a lot of damage at any point of the game. So that means if you fall behind, you're not doing as much damage and your impact is drastically lowered, whereas when you're ahead, you scale much better than many other guards in the game and you have a very heavy impact on the game. And the fact that he's partially a basic attacker, not that much, but partially at least, also means that he is a little bit more snowbally by nature. On top of that, his ultimate is also designed to be incredibly snowbally due to the fact that it can multi-proc on multiple targets at the same time, and you can get constantly healed while running through 5 people if you play it right, and if the situation favors you, and if all the other conditions are met in terms of not being CC'd and the enemy not having too many escapes and all that. On top of that, he's currently glitched as well. His slow immunity on the 3 only works when you use the 3 before getting slowed. You cannot cleanse SLOTH with it, even though it is intended to do so, meaning he doesn't even perform the way he should. And he's got a few other glitches that are not quite as impactful, but should be noted as well regarding the ultimate and similar. I honestly don't think that a place where a character is either heavily underperforming or snowbally and often feels very unimpactful or too impactful is a good place for any character. And therefore I have quite a few propositions on what could be done about Zed. Now note that due to how his kit currently works, it would be a mix of buffs and nerfs. He would get some tweaks that adjust it so that his kit just functions a little bit better without being overwhelming in specific situations. This is very important. If you were to just outright buff Zed, then he would be even more snowbally and that would be very scary. If you were to outright nerf him, then you would probably end up with a character that is almost never impactful. Therefore, I think tweaks, adjustments, shifts are what are warranted here, and I can't really separate them in the discussion either. I really have to talk about the buffs and the nerfs at the same time here because they are very intertwined. First off, some general things. Zed has very high mana cost. Skewer has higher mana cost than Ulla's 1 while doing less damage, for example. It goes up from 40 to 60 versus Ulla's consistent 50 damage, while having a very short cooldown that burns a lot of mana, and Spawn of Zed consumes a massive amount of mana considering what it does. It's 30 mana for basically just a little spawn that stands around and does nothing by itself other than slapping enemies that run right into it. Initially I thought just outright adjusting all his mana cost, decreasing them would be a good solution, as he feels like he needs a mana item at all times. However, after playing him more, I realized that if you play conservatively with your mana, you can kind of get away without a mana item. You have to play with specific items to make it work somehow, most of the time, but it is not super necessary and it's kind of okay in return for the damage he does. I still wouldn't be opposed to a tweak to the mana cost of Spawn of Zed if that ability isn't changed in other ways, but I honestly think that changing it in other ways would be the better solution and have a better outcome for Zed overall than just looking at the mana cost here, and then maybe in return it would be fair to cost a little bit more mana as well. Now before we get into the other changes, please note that I do not propose that all of these changes should be done at once. I think that these are changes that should be considered and they should have at least been said once and are on the table this way basically for high-risk to know about them as well. And then it can be looked into which of these changes make most sense, are easy to implement, could gradually be put in to see if they feel effective or not, and then based on that, slowly come to a place where Zed feels a bit more healthy than he does now. The first ability we will look at is Spawn of Zed. We'll look at the one last at Skewer because it kind of ties into everything at the end a little bit. The first thing that's already in the works as of now is the visibility of the spawns. They will apparently get an outline even through walls as far as I know, and this is very important, and I hope that in that context the targeting is also improved. So that if you hover over the spawns, you can see when you can teleport to them or when you are marking them to teleport to them with a 3. Nothing is more frustrating than putting a spawn through the wall and then not hitting it with your 3 exactly and not being able to teleport in time. It feels incredibly clunky. It should also be possible in that context to differ between ally and enemy spawns, probably by the enemy spawns simply not being highlighted. I find the current cooldown reduction on the ability somewhat awkward, and I'm not sure why it's handled like that, where it decreases by 1 second every 2 ranks. I don't see any reason to not reduce the cooldown by 0.5 seconds every rank. Yes, it may look a little bit awkward in the numbers at the bottom, but really at least it feels equally rewarding to put a rank into the ability every single time. It would also justify considering the leveling between your 2 and 3 much more. I also think that the current attack range of these spawns is just a little bit too short. It has the melee range of a normal melee basic attacker, but unfortunately with moving targets that does very little. I have gotten to kills with these spawns very randomly with a lot of luck and very precise placement, but there are so many situations where the minions basically or the spawns stand next to an enemy and do nothing. And I think that increasing the range here to 16, which is the extended basic attack range that for example a Willish has, would be absolutely fine considering that these spawns aren't moving at all. I understand that they're not supposed to be overwhelming, but I think it would be fair for this ability to have a little bit of damage and a potential to deal damage in return for the mana cost as well. As of now, this part has an extremely high frustration factor. I also don't see why the base damage of the minions doesn't scale with leveling them at all. I think a little bit of base damage increase per level, and if it's just 5 or something, would be absolutely fair. Their scaling is okay, so it's not like they need massively more damage, but I think just having that little bit of satisfaction and a little bit of a threat coming from these minions, for example, if you put them in the jungle and an enemy runs by them, would be fine. It's not like they're on a super short cooldown, you can't just constantly spam them. The only time there can be a lot of them is during the ultimate, and we'll get to that part separately. On the flip side, currently it's very easy to secure XP from lanes by just putting your spawns there, and Zed has a very easy time farming already, so I'm not quite sure if that's necessary. So it could be considered to remove the XP at a distance. I don't know if this is possible for one separate pet, because for example with Vulcan Turret it would be another story, but I could see that being a fair down trade here to just say, okay, if Zed is out of the range of that wave, then the spawn can't secure the XP either. Much more importantly though, is something that ties into the 3, into Sandstorm, and that is the spawn animation time. As of now, one of the most frustrating things you can have happening to you is you try to spawn a spawn somewhere and teleport to them as quickly as possible, because that is your normal escape. And what will either happen is you just spawn your spawn and then you die before anything else happens because for some reason you didn't teleport, or you just get your sandstorm and the spawn never appears. Now I tested this in jungle practice on literally 0 ping to make sure that this is not some weird glitch or something, and it's actually the animations. As of now, the 2 has the summoning animation where Zed raises his hand, and if you use the 3 during that animation, then nothing will happen. And you will see me testing this in the background, and I usually just had to press the 3 twice, and if I just pressed it once, I simply did not teleport. Likewise, sometimes it seems that the 3 can override the 2, I'm not quite sure how that happens, if that's maybe an issue with quickcast, but you kind of have to have it on quickcast on the other hand, because then you will just activate the 3 and your spawn never appears, and then you keep running forward, then you press the 2 and you're already in a different position, and what you wanted to do never happens. Now I do understand that a teleport is a very strong mechanic and it might need some counterbalance, but the counterbalance shouldn't be an ability that's frustrating or feels clunky as it is with the current version of it, due to the fact that often it will simply not activate. I think the animation of the 3 should simply override the animation of the 2, and if the teleport itself is an issue, then make a short windup before the teleport. Just let Zed stand around for 0.1, 0.2 seconds in return before he can fully teleport, but make it so that you can definitely teleport, and the teleport will be activated on a spawn that you spawned at all times. As for the 3 Sandstorm itself, another thing about it is that the damage within the kit is very imbalanced overall, and I think Sandstorm itself should get a slight damage increase. Don't worry, we will get to decreases as well. But this ability really feels on the lower end in terms of its base as well as scaling really. Even when you stand next to an enemy for 2 seconds, you only get 35% scaling, and you know how hard it is to stand next to an enemy for 2 seconds as an assassin, as a squishy assassin that has a build that benefits from scaling in the first place. Now let's look at the flip side of his kit a little bit, and that's the ultimate, Kingslayer. I think Kingslayer in its current state is the main reason why Zed is so snowbally. The current ult rewards being ahead, being lucky and everything else way too much, and it also basically requires you to use your entire kit for it to actually be useful. And that's not even true for Bakasura. Like for example with Bakasura, you're gonna use your ultimate and you're gonna use your 3 in the ult, and otherwise the ult's probably not very good. And in most situations, or in many situations, you can also benefit from using the 2 during the ultimate. With Zed, you literally spam your entire kit in the ultimate. You need the 3 to proc the ultimate more frequently, otherwise you get half as many procs, which makes you a lot weaker, and you can get multi-procs on multiple targets. You also need the 2 to spam out the minions. If you don't manually spawn them, they will spawn randomly in bad places. And you need the 1 to actually deal a lot of damage with all the stuff that you're getting, because otherwise you don't get that much extra damage after all. I think it's cool that an ult ties into the kit very closely, but I don't think an ult should require the whole kit to be up to actually be effective. The first issue here, however, is something else, and that is the ult windup. The animation should be a lot more visual, a lot more clear for enemies to see, to know that you are ulting. You can barely see it in many situations. And at the same time, the windup of the ultimate should be a lot shorter. Because as of now, you are kind of wasting the first second of the entire ult to even get into the fight. You use the ultimate, you're stuck in the animation, you're hammering down your 3, hopefully that it comes up eventually, or you're hammering down your 2 in order to spawn a minion, and then hammering down the 3 in order to teleport there. And like I said, the interaction between the 2 and 3 is clunky as well. So you have this double clunkiness here where half of the time, especially when you're new to the character, you end up not having activated everything you wanted to activate. You're either not going to activate your ultimate, or you're not going to activate your 3, or you're not going to activate your 2. Maybe this could be fixed by simply giving the 3 an override, where the 3 kind of gets activated, no animation or whatever, because I don't even think it has much of an animation anyways, and it just pops up even when you're using other abilities at the same time. That could kind of fix this entire issue, but as of now, the issue also feels very awkward on the ultimate. In return, one thing that I think should be heavily nerfed is the ability to multi-proc via the ultimate. I think the mark should only be on one target at a time, and that's whoever you're primarily attacking with basic attacks or whatever, and they just get the other ticks from the 3 and stuff as well. Because as of now, when enemies cluster around you, you just get way too many heals, way too much damage on them, and way too many spawns way too quickly. And again, this is especially problematic for the amount of spawns that you can get, that basically break the balance for the rest of his kit, because the spawns otherwise aren't that strong, but could be insanely strong if you have a lot of them during the ultimate and they were a bit stronger than they are right now. So I think the multiproc on the 3 in combination with the ultimate should simply go. And if you hit someone with the 1 and the minions, the mark should simply transfer onto that target. If the ability gets that change, it could get a slight decrease in base damage and scaling, and maybe the healing in return, that we would have to see. But this would make it so that the ultimate itself is not a threat to everyone, but to one person that you're hunting down as an assassin, and at the same time it feels more rewarding to use the ultimate without using your entire kit. You will still proc the mark sometimes, and the mark will deal a decent amount of damage without having everything else surrounding it deal massive amounts of damage in order for it to be effective in the first place. I also still think that a short CC immunity / cleanse at the start of the ult would not be a bad thing. I'm talking 0.5 seconds, just a quick glow so you can go in at this point. Make it very visible so enemies know you're ulting, and then just start shredding. And last but not least, let's take a look at the one, Skewer. Now that we've talked about everything else and how we could shift the power here in various places, we have to look at the main damaging ability too. I think right now Skewer has a lot of scaling and not enough base damage in most situations. His late game ones can be absolutely devastating if your ult is up and you have a few spawns out and you have all that extra scaling coming in with a high power build. Whereas in other situations, it just feels like a light slap on the enemy. If the base damage was a little higher, the scaling was a little lower, then it would free up other build options for Set as well. And I think overall that would be good for him, because right now it feels very punishing to go a little bit more tanky in many situations. Also, I think the damage for too many spawns should be decreased. I think 40% damage for following spawns is fine for the first ones, but I think at some point it should scale lower, like 20% after 4 targets or something, just so that an overwhelming amount of spawns doesn't overwhelm the enemy entirely and makes it so that they basically have no chance of surviving from almost full health. And in the same sense, I know a lot of people said that they want a stun if you hit a target with multiple spawns. I think, after thinking about it a little more, this should actually not be implemented. And I have a good reason why I think that. If this gets implemented, then snowballing with Set will be even more extreme than it is already. Normally, you are not in a position where you can just throw 2 spawns at the enemy unless you're very ahead. You're already in a snowbally situation. So when it happens is either when you know you can just dunk on someone entirely and you don't need your escape or anything afterwards, or when you are in a situation where you're using your ultimate, where you're already very, very strong. So you effectively would be buffing the ult and you would be buffing sets that are ahead by also giving them CC on top of that, whereas a set that is behind, that is not in a aggressive position at some point of the game, will actually lose out even more because they still don't get that CC. These are the adjustments within the kit itself, but there are a few more. I think his abilities could in general have some more audio. This is especially important for the ultimate, but they are very quiet and you don't really know what's going on with the abilities, whereas with other characters they're a lot more distinct. I think the 3 also doesn't necessarily have to multiproc the passive on a wave. I think that's an interesting mechanic, but it kind of makes it, again, something more off balance in many situations where it doesn't have to be really. It could be a lot more linear growth in terms of attack speed. On another note, I think it might be a good idea to limit the potential to proc Hydra's Lament, maybe not give him a proc for that with every 2, because I think this item in a situation where you're ahead, again, allows them to snowball too much. In a situation where you're behind, you can't go into the enemies like that, but when you can, then you can consistently proc Hydra's Lament with so many things on him, and it feels a bit overwhelming. I'm also not so sure if item procs should proc every time you get 4 stacks on the mark on the ultimate. Right now that's glitched, because if you proc it with a 3, then item effects like Crusher don't actually work, but if that gets fixed, then he could deal a lot of extra damage through items in his ultimate, and I don't really think that's necessary. Again, it's one of those snowball things. There is another idea that I have for a more dramatic shift that I wanted to put at the end here. I think the other ones are more mellow, reasonable, easily adjustable fixes, and this one is one if all else fails kind of. I think it would be cooler, it would be nicer, but I think a lot of people will also disagree with this one. So there is the option to move the teleport from the 3 to the 2. That would mean that he would be in a different position overall. Right now, every aggression and escape potential within Set's kit outside of the poke damage from the 1 essentially lies in his 3. You need his 3 to go in, you need his 3 to proc his passive, you need his 3 to proc his ultimate a lot. So everything surrounds this ability, and it's also your CC immunity at the same time, your soft CC immunity, slow immunity. That feels like it's too much to me personally, and the 2 on the other hand feels like it's not very much, because it's really just spawning minions. If the teleport was moved to the 2, in a way Set would be a fair bit safer. He wouldn't have to go super all in all the time. But there would have to be a return trade-off. And that could be that instead of spawning a second minion when you target the minion that you already spawned, you will teleport there instead. Would be very easy, because if you wanted to spawn 2 minions, you just put it somewhere else. And it would feel a lot more intuitive, because you could really just spam the button if you want a quick teleport. No delay issues anymore, no animation issues. It's very clear to the game, okay, you press the 2 twice, you want to teleport there. Kind of like Thor Hammer, for example. But what could be the possible downside here? It could be made so that when you use the teleport, it uses one of your spawn charges. So if you want to use a spawn to attack the enemy with your 1, then you drop that down and you can teleport to it, and then you can shoot the spawn forward. Or you can shoot the spawn forward first and then teleport towards it. As you only have 2 spawns at a time, in many situations it would still lead to you having to use it in an aggressive way, because you won't have another spawn that you can put down somewhere to teleport back. At the same time, it would give more benefit to actually leveling the 2, because that way the cooldown reduction and the duration would become a lot more helpful. The quicker your spawns come back, the more flexible you are in that regard. That's already the case to some degree, but it would be a lot more than it is now. Otherwise, the cooldown timer itself could just be used for the teleport on the 2, whereas the passive meter bars on the side would be used for the actual spawn counter, but I'm not sure if that's something that can be internally separated. I think this would be an option to kind of adjust him in yet another way. And that concludes the breakdown. If you're new to the channel, feel free to hit the sub button and maybe the bell. I hope this was interesting and insightful. I hope this gave you some more insight in what could be done with set in the future, and hopefully we'll see some tweaks come from Hydra. Maybe we'll already see some with the patch notes this week. I think at least the targeter update should be in there, and the hot fixes, or the fixes rather, for some of the glitches. And with that, thank you guys very much for watching. I hope to see you all for the next one tomorrow. DukeSloth, out.